Good morning, everybody, and welcome to this EACT in Action online session around the topic of Know Your Customer and how to facilitate the management and exchange of data in treasury processes. I'm very happy that we are able to have this and also have very interesting panels on board. Maybe just one small housekeeping point. Questions from the audience are very welcome. We have agreed in the group we would like to answer the questions at the end of the session. So we will pick up your questions as you place them and come back to them. I'm Cornelia Hesse. I'm on the EACT board for the German Association of Corporate Treasurers. And I would like to welcome our panelists today, and I would like them to introduce themselves to you. And I will start unclockwise with Patrick, if you wouldn't mind starting.
Sure. Hi, good morning, everybody. My name is Patrick Hollemans. I'm a treasurer of SWIFT, located in Belgium, responsible for the cash management, foreign exchange, and the payment factory of SWIFT globally. And I'm also a member of the ATEP board, the Belgian Treasury Association.
Thank you, Patrick. Stefan, may I ask you?
Yeah, welcome from my side and good morning as well. My name is Stefan Wolf. I'm the CEO of the Global Legal Entity Identifier Foundation, an organization that manages the issuance of a global identification scheme called the LEI. And I'm looking forward to talking with you today about how the LEI could be utilized to benefit all of your KYC process and up beyond.
Thank you, Stefan. Séverine, may I ask you to continue?
Good morning, everyone. My name is Séverine Leblevenec. I joined Aliaxis just a few weeks ago as the global head of treasury. So a lot on my plate now.
Thank you. Noël, please.
Yes, good morning, all. My name is Noël Belnimoun. I'm corporate senior legal counsel at ArcelorMittal based in Paris, within which I'm mainly responsible for assisting our centralized in-house bank with many legal, regulatory, and compliance aspects, which includes KYC in various countries. I'm also headed the compliance commission of the French Treasury Association. And just few words to explain that it's a great pleasure and reconnaissance for me to participate to this panel on KYC, because I hindered work since 3 years on these challenged topics, and I believe we are now in position to identify robust and efficient solutions that I will be glad to explore with you and my co-panelists today.
Thank you. And Tarek, please.
I am Tarek Tranberg. Welcome also from my side. I am the head of public affairs at the EACT, so I lead the external advocacy function and engagement on all financial regulatory topics for the European Treasury community.
Thank you, dear panelists. Like we heard from Noël, she's already working on the topic for 3 years. I think many of you have also been involved in this topic for quite some years. We know it's a compliance-related and regulatory-driven topic, which keeps us busy. It's quite time-consuming. I found some statistics that multinational companies spend up to 25 hours a week on these topics. On the other side, if we take the banks, it's quite an expensive topic for them as well, from an average of about 125 million euros they spend on this, and even in peaks up to a much larger amount. So we're all familiar with the topic, and this session we will focus on the corporate's perspectives. We will get some insights from Stefan Wolf, and our panelists will share their insights to the topic. So without much further introduction, I would like us to step into the discussion and kick it off with some practical aspects which are currently being addressed and occupying the treasurers and compliance managers. May I ask you, Noël, to start with your view on the topic?
Yeah, sure, Cornelia.
Thank you.
I may share high-level thought and practical concern that I continue to experience on KYC first. The first is that, strangely, it remains, after so many years, a heavy administrative and time-consuming burden and a strong pressure to accommodate all non-standardized requests in an imposed and short delay. This is a real concern because the KYC starts increasing since 6-7 years, and we all face the same situation today that we have started to experience 7 years ago. The second that we are all aware of is that financial institution works to develop and offer standardized documentation to collect consistent information. However, I have not observed any improvement in this area. Hence, we are all struggling to accommodate with bank requests that are not consistent, even within the same group of banks. The third that I have recently experienced and realized is that I have observed is the absence of visibility I have on the activity to come each year. I mean, like everyone around the table, I've experienced an increasing number of requests from 2015, putting KYC in the top list of concerns for treasurer. And now I observe that depending on the year, I'm unable to predict the volume and the nature of KYC requests I will receive. So it's put me in the position that I'm unable to efficiently allocate the right resource dedicated to this activity. If I can provide one example, in 2018, I received 800 requests. In 2019, a bit less. And 2021, due to the pandemic, I have received a very number of limited requests, whereas I have dedicated one person to this activity. So I assume that this is due to the pandemic and the financial institution have focused last year on the support, the financial support of their clients. So I was expecting this year an explosion of requests that was finally quite limited compared to what I was used to receive before. And if I may, one last input that I have practically experienced, which was a real surprise, is that KYC so negatively impacts the relationships with bank partners that now we are starting to assess this criteria before entering into a relationship with a bank compared to another.
Yes.
This is what I wanted to share high level. Thank you
very much, Noël. So, Séverine, what are you struggling with to accommodate and allocate for?
You know my appetite for technology. I think it's often my solution for too many issues. And I think we are so far still struggling to be able to leverage technology to address that kind of challenge. One of the reasons that Noël just mentioned is still a lack of harmonization between banks or between countries. We know that SWIFT KYC has been working on that. We know that some banks like Citi have been trying to work on that, but still this lack of harmonization is one impediment. I wish we could have easier, more capabilities to have more holistic systems that are easier to feed with interfaces between corporate internal systems like blueprints, for instance, but with a bit of with the ability to refine the data that you're sharing or you don't want to share. Also, can we leverage APIs maybe so that things are updated on a live basis? So yeah, to me, it's really how can we automate this exchange of data and only keep treasury people or legal people busy with a restrained, shorter amount of data that cannot be automated. For instance, around sanctioned countries, or we understand that some areas are a bit more sophisticated. So yeah, I would like technology to be helping us even more.
Thank you. So Tarek, hearing what is worrying the corporate treasurers, what is driving the regulatories on the topic?
And I think there's always from a regulatory perspective, there's always, especially when you talk about technological developments that can help with your compliance functions, I think there's always that tightrope that regulators need to walk between, on the one hand, encouraging innovation, which necessarily means not picking winners or losers or constraining the regulatory framework too much, and at the same time then trying to force innovation by adopting harmonized standards. So I think we're seeing more and more of that recently. I mean, the Commission is working on they have this holistic view at the moment where they want to advance a harmonization of supervisory reporting frameworks, where they're looking just generally at what is the current ecosystem of financial regulation and what are the reporting and regulatory requirements that are being imposed on that across those, and where is there scope for harmonization and removing duplicative reporting requirements across those pieces. At the same time, they're also looking, whilst on the one hand, they've decided to be technology agnostic, so as to not hamper innovation. There are considerations that are coming up when you think about process automation, when it comes to regulating the use of artificial intelligence. There are the ethical questions that go with that. Where is the responsibility for the human agent that has to be placed in that? And at the same time, if you look more concretely at KYC compliance requirements, I think there's a realization amongst the regulators that it's very burdensome, which is partially as a result of the fact that in the past, there's been too much room for maneuver that has been given to individual member states in the EU. So that's against that realization, they're now looking to just harmonize all the requirements with a top-down regulatory instrument across all member states to at least avoid the additional burden that is caused by minutely different requirements in different member states. So I would say regulators are very acutely aware and they're trying to do the best they can. But at the same time, as people probably know, the regulatory process in the EU is fairly long. So any changes that are being put into motion now will not materialize for a number of years. So it's not a silver bullet, but regulators are generally trying to help in this context.
Thank you, Tarek. Thank you for the insights. Let us move from here to the daily operational KYC related work in Treasury. And I would like to ask you to share some of your insights to solutions available and developments ahead. If we maybe start with the solutions available, I would like to ask Stefan to start to give us his thoughts on the topic.
Thank you, Cornelia. Never change a running system. I'm sure you have all heard the sentence. Change management in organizations is one of the most complicated tasks. We're all used to continuous improvement, but sometimes changes are necessary due to major disruptions in the market. And I would like to highlight very quickly two. One was the financial crisis with the collapse of the Lehman Bank, where people learned all of a sudden that the banks had no clue whom they're doing business with. It was all siloed in departments here, departments there, stored on computers everywhere. We've heard from major banks that they had up to 132 master files that are not connected with each other. That was a major disruption, and that led to the formation of the Global Legal Entity Identifier system, a unique, globally available ISO standard that is used to identify not just corporates, but any kind of legal entities. The second disruption is happening right now. And I think the COVID-19 crisis has revealed brutally how little we know about supply chain. And that is what means customers, and know your customers, but also know your suppliers, know your suppliers' suppliers, know your customers' customers. And all of that in a distributed environment where we don't see siloed IT systems any longer, but APIs and computing across multiple participants. And that requires, in my opinion, a more rigorous standard on KYC, the tools available, but also standards like, for instance, the LEI and others that will make your life easier.
Thank you, Stefan. And maybe, Noel, you shared some practical examples already. May I ask you to share your insights to the current solution landscape, please?
Yes, I'm very glad to introduce you the solution I was perusing since a few years. Of course, you have the banks working on their own dedicated platform where clients can upload their documentation, but unfortunately, this is not viable for large corporate or even medium corporates that have multiple bank partners. Meanwhile, some service provider has also developed qualitative KYC automated solutions that are live now. I will let maybe Patrick comment more the initiative and now KYC registry tool. The only insight I have regarding this solution is that, according to me, this is the most global solution true. But to date only accessible to large and SWIFT connected corporates. I know that in the coming years, this will be extended to non-SWIFT connected entities, but to date it is not. And I must say that KYC registry has a flaw of its quality in the sense that it is an ambitious solution covering several jurisdictions. However, in my opinion, this solution is too intrusive on the nature of information to gather and to be made available by corporates. I have in mind specifically the personal data and all the business sensitive information that banks request. The second solution is GLEIF, which is a regional solution supported by Société Générale, not yet fully operational for some structuring reasons. The solution is based on a blockchain technology where information remains in corporate side and shared through a peer-to-peer network. The added value of that GLEIF solution seems to date the solution addressing concerns related to the information storage and their security because they remain with the corporate owners. The third and the fourth solution, which are similar, are conformity and HIHAP, which are successively a French and a Luxembourgish solution. I present them together because they are quite similar. And in order to save time also, they are local initiatives. However, the interesting information is that those solutions are exportable in all jurisdictions in which the corporate has business. So we start from a national solution and you could extend this solution to all the need you have throughout the world. The added value is that they are a robust and efficient solution, live today, easy to implement without cost, and the most important is that they do not practice over-compliance, for which I'm really sensitive as legal and compliance officer within my structure. Finally, you have the solution named Symphony, which is a German solution, but not only. Symphony has the ambition to develop a global network to convey data from one national provider to another, creating a global network based in existing robust solution. So it's quite ambitious and enthusiastic for me to give you some insight on this Symphony network, because obviously this could lead to a global solution challenging KYC registry and immediately available to all type and size of corporates. That's it.
Thank you for sharing that insight, Noël. And Noël already addressed you, Patrick. You're here as the corporate treasurer for SWIFT, but we would also like to learn a little bit about the SWIFT solution.
Yeah, so indeed, so SWIFT, you know that SWIFT had this register, the KYC register already activated for interbank, for the banks. And a couple of years ago, they made it, they developed a tool to allow also corporates to do their KYC. So it's quite obvious, me as treasurer of SWIFT, that I would use that tool. I'm using it, in fact, as a user, as a contributor, but also I provide also input to our IT team and our about user friendliness, the things which are missing. And also to make sure that we get that to 80%, that's in fact the target, I think, and 80% what banks are requesting. And the target is to get as high as possible, but obviously, as somebody mentioned already, some specific sanctions requests cannot be standardized globally. It's a global solution, so we have to comply with the legislation request globally. So SWIFT specifically, we are, I'm using it now for 2-3 years, and we had one FTE before, fully spending its time on KYC, doing the manual stuff, sending the emails, sending the copies of the passports and everything that is requested. So now we have 33 legal entities. They are global, covering I think around 80 bank accounts, with 4 global banks. So we are populating now the register for the 33 entities. 21 have fully been populated. And we see now the consumption happening by 3 banks, which is really good. And I see the big advantages. And honestly, I don't want to make any publicity for this SWIFT one. I think it's the big advantage of a portal in general is the fact that, I mean, we we only have to publish the data once. And I always get these complaints or these comments from our management, our directors. Well, how are you sure that a copy of my passports is not distributed all over the world? You know, we send it via email, we have no other choice before. So now we put it on the register, we put it once, and we ask the banks to consume it. So it's, for me, that's the big advantage about doing it only once instead of doing it towards all the banks we work for. Secondly, it's secured. It's a secure platform. The access is controlled. So yeah, the people who can, you grant access to the people who to the banks, and you can remove the access as well. So you know who's going to consume, and if you don't want them to consume anymore, you withdraw the access. So there's some access control. Secondly, also some data, also official data, is validated by the KYC team. So if you publish annual accounts, so they make sure it's the last version of the annual accounts. If they publish national data about the company, there's some control behind it. So the consumer and the banks in our case, they are sure that what they receive has some validity and is most recent data. So for me, it's still time consuming for the time being, because we have to feed and we have to keep it updated. But I think because of it's a single platform, a single chain, a single way of communicating to the banks, in the end, I think it will give us some benefit.
If I may, one input.
Sure,
the whole solution existing over the markets are working on the same characteristic, meaning you will feed the platform one time, and this will be distribute, yes, to all counterparty having access to, because you are monitoring effectively the rights for corporate banks or external stakeholder to have access to those information in its entirety or partially. So in that sense, the whole set of initiative and existing solution work in the same way. The interesting now is that recently they were made aware that the burden has been transferred to the email back and forth between the corporate and the bank, and we need to fit the different platforms so that we need to have one FTE dedicated full-time to feed the platform and update the information. They have addressed this concern by developing a pre-populated tools that will feed with all information available in our corporate website, on the market, with some trade and register company, all the information that are publicly available, and you will have to obviously confirm the exhaustiveness of the information and also filling the missing one. That's I didn't develop yet the characteristic of each solution, but they are more or less equivalent in the advantages and the benefit on corporate side.
Yeah. I mean, I want to come back on that comment that you made, and also Severin, I think some information is of course publicly available on public websites, and we should make sure that these registers, whatever you use, have some kind of interaction with this public website to feed already this information automatically. I mean, today the feeding and of the register is still too much time consuming. There's still too much time spent to make sure it's all up to date, which data which is in the end publicly available as well. So we need to work on interfacing public sources into the registry. That next steps.
I think that's a good one to lead over to you, Severin, to share your thoughts on the topic.
Yes, I think Noel and Patrick have really put the finger of what to me is still a kind of a hurdle to adopt those technologies, is that for us at the moment we are using the tools you referred to, Noel, like BNP, Barclays, Citi are developing, where to onboard you can do it on their tool, and there most often they are everything that they can fetch from public registries, they feed it in. So you only have to fill in some additional information, and also of course all the characteristics of the type of accounts and functionalities you want. So this is a relatively reasonable situation, if you go to a register, of course, you need to feed it. And at the moment, you need to feed it also for this public information. So for a new entity, it is more work. So when it is one entity that is bank, which is multi-bank, okay, you have a payout ratio, which is relatively good. But if you have a really large legal basis, some entities have like 3,000 entities in the, or 1,000 entities in the company. And each of those entities, if they bank with only one bank, actually, you end up with more work to feed the platform than having the bank do their homework and come to us only with what they didn't find. So I think the good solution would be what you mentioned, Noel. It's a platform that is multi-bank, but starts by feeding all what they can from the public registries and updating that themselves. And then we only add on the rest of the information, because you still have this barrier to entry, especially for entities that when you have streamlined your banking universe, you are to some point less inclined to onboard those platforms, except for really like the in-house banks, the head office, or those entities that have more banks and so higher individual KYC needs. So yeah, I think we're not yet there in terms of solutions, but I think that would be and I'm sure SWIFT will evolve in that. Of course, SWIFT has all that knowledge and the credibility of the bank. So there is this position that is full. Another aspect is the cost. It's not easy for me to get a budget for KYC. It's not very sexy, right? As a when they think, oh, you can have that done in a low-cost country. Well, it's not the most sexy project to invest on. So we need to see how banks can support that kind of investment on the corporates, because I think there is a lot of benefit for the banks. So for this, I think the SWIFT KYC model is working well. So I see those two limitations now.
I would like to pick up on a topic which we've received from the audience. It's about, we discussed it also in our preparation, the solutions available and the acceptance by the banking partners. You touched a little bit on it, Séverine. Would you like to say a few words on this one, share a bit more on the adaptation of the solutions addressed and the acceptance by the banking partners?
So I don't know if you refer to the proprietary solutions of the
Well,
bank?
It says like, I have 25 to 30 banks, only 5 are willing to use them. How can I convince them better? Or for instance, with the KYC, SWIFT registry, the banks are not willing to use them if they are not incorporated into their systems. So it's coming from those two angles.
I don't use SWIFT KYC now, but I would be very surprised that we could not ask banks to consume that, given that it's a platform that they are used to using from their end. So I don't see a problem of adoption on the bank side. Now, it's a matter of us, if we implement a tool like SWIFT KYC, to say to the banks, that's where you're going to find it, guys, and nowhere else. So at some point, right, they will go for it. And I think the consumption cost is irrelevant in that respect. Compared to the benefit that they have to know where to find it, and in a way that they can also backwards interface it back into their systems if they want, right? Because they know this structure, they know this database. So for them, there is the ability to build APIs in the background so that they don't have to do that manually. Now, of course, the bank proprietary platform, by definition, the bank developed them. It takes a lot of time for them, because they, of course, when they do that, they review the requirements in each country. They try to make that homework. But of course, it takes time for the rollout, so they don't directly have it for all their jurisdictions. And guess what? It's typically the most difficult jurisdictions that are not in the tool, obviously. So and as Noel mentioned, I mean, it's to me, it's an intermediary step, right? It's better than nothing, and it is the good thing that it keeps a data repository where everybody knows where it is. We know what the bank has on their file and so on. So I like that aspect. But of course, it's not a solution to have one system per bank. We want something that is multi-bank.
We need something that is multi-bank. We need banks to have multi-solution available to each type of clients. And we need also an interoperability en français, on each solution so that we can move ahead from one solution to another to be applicable and implementable at corporate level on client side, but also at local level. SWIFT, it will not be used by all subsidiary. But conformity I have will. Banks should now realize that the only global solution is not the only solution, and in the landscape, they must adopt a multiplicity of solutions and have an embrace approach, I would say, regarding the different solutions that the market provides.
Yeah, I think that's a good statement. Yeah. Thank you for allowing the question here in between. If I may move back to the question we are discussing, Tarek, would you like to add something from the perspective?
I mean, this is ultimately the problem from a regulatory side is when you're dealing with market practices where when it comes to the question of solutions, which is not something that is driven by the regulatory requirement itself, it's hard for regulators to interfere and enable something. Equally, it would be fairly difficult for regulators to insert mandatory requirements on banks to provide X, Y, or Z. So I think ultimately, in the meantime, what can be done is more on the harmonization and standardization of data formats and the basic requirements that have to be complied with. But then the solutions that come on top of that provide the ability for people to fulfill those requirements, that's something where regulators will very unlikely want to step into for fear of being seen to take sides or promoting one thing over the other, and therefore being accused of meddling in free market practices. So I think what one can work towards is harmonization of standards and also, for example, integration of things like the LEI into regulatory requirements and into broader financial services regulation, so that there is a reference in regulation to the existing data standards that can be used. But beyond that, I think that's the most regulators can do at this stage without being seen to pick sides.
I hear your point, Tarek. Now look at EMIR regulation, right? They did go into, okay, these tools are the tools we are going to recognize. So when they want to, they do it, right? So yeah, once they have harmonized the needs, then they could get a kind of label on solutions, right? Not maybe develop the solutions themselves, but say, okay, these are the requirements that we want in a solution, and they could stamp it. And so they still could, I think, play a role there. But
so I think no, I agree. I think that's a good point. I think it's if you sort of predefine the requirements that a compliant solution should be fulfilling, that avoids sort of the regulators having to say, well, you can use 1, 2, or 3 solutions if you just say they have to comply with these standards, which all goes back to standardization of requirements, right? Because it goes back to saying, from a regulatory point of view, we want to use this harmonized data standard. These are the standardized requirements that we would like to see in there. And then you work backwards from there from the market side and say, okay, well, if I'm looking at the standardized requirements that I'm being required by my regulator, only these 3 tools meet that. So then that automatically limits your choice in a good way, probably.
I just one thing, if I may, Cornelia, don't forget that the different AML regulation oblige first the banking institution, and on top of the harmonized set of rules that is foreseen at the level of the European Committee to be adopted, where on the client side, we expect to have the same level of information to be disclosed regardless the bank we work with. There is also the bank's appetite and own assessment for which they are accounted, I would say, responsible. And depending on this risk appetite and the level of assessment they wish to implement within their group, it remains that they will have requests that goes beyond this set of harmonized rules. So you will not find any solution, once again, which is consistent with the regulation. It will be a minimum set of information to be gathered and data to be collected for proceeding with the assessment. But I see that this harmonization will not be totally completed in the coming years. Reason why we need this multiplicity of solutions implement either in corporate side and in client side. And the second input, which is important, is that the recent AML 5th and 6th directive are enlarging the scope of obliged entity to, from what I've experienced, auditors, lawyers, tax officers, and notaries, and there will be a large demand because the assessment that can be done by a bank to identify his client and assess him will not be the same from my law office. So you will need to have a tool that addresses the different concerns so that you will split the information to be provided considering the profile of your counterparty, I would say.
Thank you for sharing. We've almost already moved into the next area of topics, where I would like to ask you from your perspective to share what you would see. We've heard about it needs to be multi-banking and integratable, easily to be integrated and so on, our requests from treasurers. So from your perspective, what should a combined solution or approach on these topics be addressed or comprise, if you have your say, so to say? And maybe we start with Patrick now to give your voice on your opinion on this topic.
Just repeat, Cornelia,
what should a combined approach? We talked about solutions, treasury requirements, we talked about harmonization, we talked about identifiers. What are your top priorities on that scheme we've just been addressing in the previous question?
Yeah, well, my top priority is to get more consumption and more usage of the tool, right? I mean, we talked about interfacing and getting automatic feed, but my top priority is to get this thing more used by banks, by our banks. So I think I am pushing very much we work with global banks, right? So and the global bank headquarters, they use this application and they use the register. What I notice is that the subsidiaries of the banks in the regions, they're not very much aware of this application. So we try to push, in fact, our regions, the regional banks, which are member of the global banks, to consume the data and push it forward. This will only work. This tool will only work if there's consumption and if there's a contribution. So whenever we're opening a new bank account or whenever we start with a new banking activity, I think we need to push the banks really to use a central tool, whatever the tool would be, if it's SWIFT or another tool. But we have to make sure, otherwise this thing's going to die out. Like other initiatives we started at a certain point in time. We are thinking about EBAM. The EBAM utility failed as well because there was no mass adoption. So if we need mass adoption, we need automation to make these tools user friendly and heavily used. That's for me the biggest stretch and the biggest challenge for the future. Otherwise, I'm just afraid if this is not going to be used soon and heavily, it will smoothly die out again.
Thank you, Patrick. Stefan, may I ask to give your voice and contribution on the topic?
Yes, and I would like to give you a view that might sound a little bit different than what you heard so far. Identity, for instance, is required in all these processes. You need to understand whom you're doing business with, right? Identity is usually conferred by governments, by the sovereign through their business registries, commercial registries, and whatever. However, we at GLEIF maintain a list of 750 authoritative sources for verifying identity. And in some countries, we have multiple sources even contradicting each other. So the solution must require a global standardized scheme for identification. There is no other way. In the long run, there is absolutely no other way. Unfortunately, if you would ask my mother or my children if there is a problem, they would say no, because they can go shopping on the internet, they can purchase anything, they can wire money, and everything seems to be solved. So it is basically our job and the job of the banks, together with you, to make a solution that works for everyone. And that requires the following, in my opinion. Rather than to look for platform solutions where you then create another monopoly, we should run a different approach. Why shouldn't the identity belong to you rather than a platform? And then you can use your identity through standard APIs, standard messages, standard everything with any of the platforms. And the platforms can compete with each other for the sake of a good, customer service. But that requires that you are in charge of your own identity and can manage your own identity independent of platforms. And that, in my opinion, is something worth a try. And we at GLEIF are working towards this goal as well.
Thank you. Would you, Séverine or Noël, like to add something to it? I think you enabled the transition also into the topic.
I would like a little bit to mix the comments of Stefan and Patrick and say, yes, we want the banks to have adoptions of the tools that we use, right? But for instance, we want them also to use the KYC not only for their own AML regulatory requirement, but also to deliver to treasurer also some new services. Like if they use the LEI, we can push them to use the LEI to check the identity of a bank account when we send money over, right? We all know that the name of the beneficiary is not very robust. If we would use the LEI for that, then it would be more robust. So not only we are willing to do a lot of efforts and sometimes investments, which I question, as you heard, to help banks meet their obligations. In return, we also want them that, given that they have this better KYC information, that they leverage it to our purpose as well. For instance, this confirmation of account owner and beneficiary. You have some local regulations in some countries helping on that, but I think definitely we need to be more demanding on our banks. It's easy to say there are no banks here, but yes. Definitely I think we are in the same boat, and in this area there should be less competitivity and more cooperation for the interest of the community.
Yeah. Noël, you're on mute.
I wanted to jump on your last comment, Séverine. All the more so there should be less competitivity and more coordination, but I would say in between banks first,
yes,
in between banks community and corporates, and it's now for financial institutions to understand that they should push the information that are available on their side or publicly available throughout the LEI as well to the client, and not always the client to invest and spend time effectively to push any single information to the banks. One comment regarding the LEI, out of the scope of the KYC, for which it is obvious that the LEI should be used as a common identifier, I think that LEI is a powerful tool to implement to address also contractual identification. I receive so many contracts where I see just in the comparison of the parties the logos of the bank instead of its identification, name, surname, address. So the LEI is a good tool that I started requesting since 2 years in the contracts and used to review. And also, what about using the LEI in the counterparty risk assessments? We are at the level of treasury, and treasurer performing their risk counterparty assessments at the level of the group. the mother company and not the different subsidiary or branch they work with. And the LEI is a good tool to identify with whom I'm working with currently, a branch, a subsidiary, where it is located, what is the mother and direct company headed this branch or a subsidiary I work with. And also the legal assessment on contractual side with whom I am contracting as well. I see time is running. So
yes, and Stefan also wanted to make a comment to this, to these contributions. Please, Stefan.
Thank you. The picture is a little bit broader. Let me give you an example. You sign a contract with a business partner, then you would like to raise a purchase order. The purchase order will be delivered. You receive an invoice. The invoice is an electronic machine-readable invoice in any of these new formats like PEPL and others. Then you receive the invoice. Then you would like to pay the invoices. You have two banks in the middle. One is your bank. One is the bank of your partnering organization. That is the workflow we all faced with every single day. And if you do that cross-border, it's really painful. By putting the LEI there, it solves one piece of the puzzle, because then you have an identifier that you can match and link to your data assets. But more importantly, in my opinion, is that you secure the content electronically as well, digitally as well. So you sign, you seal, if you like, the content by digitally signing them with crypto methods. And there, the LEI also plays a role, because we have the standards to put the LEI into digital identity. And let me give you an example. We file our annual reports in Europe from now on in XBRL, which is a reporting standard for financial information. And by doing that, we provided an example where, you know, these reports could be digitally signed and therefore sealed and shielded from any misuse or manipulation and anything else. So I think by putting the LEI into these workflows and consider also a digital transformation towards a more secure and trusted environment, then you see the full picture.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Stefan. Now, I would like to do some housekeeping. We have roughly 8 to 10 minutes left. I would like to lead over to the conclusion of the discussion and also give the representatives from some of the national treasury associations to say a few words on what they are working on, and also a small outlook on LEI developments. So maybe also from the German Association of Treasurers, there's a KYC group, there is an e-signature group, there is an IBAN group. They will now be consolidated into one. Yesterday, an update of a KYC booklet was published. So there is a lot going on in the national treasury associations. Maybe Patrick, you want to share what the Belgium Association is doing?
Yeah, so when we opened the KYC for corporates, we set up with ATAP a working group. I think Severin, you were part of that working group as well. So we invited treasurers in Belgium. I think there were a couple of workshops at that point in time to define the baseline. You know, what is the baseline that you have to put in the system? So that was a super valuable input for the people at SWIFT to develop the baseline. Now we are live now, and what we're doing now with ATAP is again workshops once per year, twice a year. We try to come together and we discuss, okay, how can we promote now the tool, or to promote the banks and the corporates to join the tool? What is still lagging behind? What is weakening? So we tried through the association, try to get more corporates on board, try to get also more push to the banks. And so far, it's okay. It's not easy, to be fully transparent. It's not easy to get more corporates and more banks on board, but we have to keep on pushing. And we try it through the associations. I think if all the associations do their effort, we can get more and more usability and of the tool. So.
Thank you, Patrick. Maybe Stefan, you want to say a few words on what LEI is developing or is ahead?
First of all, the LEI emerged from the financial crisis, of course, and it was supposed to help managing systemic risk and risk management in general. But it has evolved since, and many other industries have picked up the LEI and raised interest. I was talking about healthcare and pharma already through the COVID-19 crisis. The telecom industry, the automotive industry is interested for their supply chains. China has mandated the LEI for import declarations for 29 different countries. So you can't import it or export to China from those countries if you don't have an LEI. We're running a project together with the German Development Aid Organization in Africa, providing services to SMEs in Africa so that they can participate in global trade more easily. So there are so many different initiatives. And this is what I would like to highlight at the end. The LEI is not an application. The LEI is not a tool of any sort that you can use to pick and solve one problem. The LEI forms an infrastructure that you can integrate in all these workflows, right? And that's the potential for the LEI. And more people pick that up. And last point, and I mentioned this already, this raises immediately the question of trust and how can you avoid fraud, you know, in cases where two computers talk with each other, how can they identify themselves and how can you be sure that they belong to the right organization and to the right officer, that organization who signed off a document. And that is what we're working on right now with a project called the VLEI, the Verifiable LEI, which is nothing else but the LEI, but digitally sealed with crypto means, so that it can be used in any type of signing or transactions and sealing and so on and so forth.
Thank you for sharing, Stefan. Noël, what is the French Association working on?
We see an increase of the email regulation and the extended scope of obliged entity. So at the French Treasury Association, we envision to first pursue the scrutiny on the existing and emerging solution and continue promoting the corporate view and needs towards this solution. And currently we feel that now is the right moment, in fact, to onboard the bank's community in the discussion at FTA level, which could be in collaboration with other national treasury association and EACT, of course, in order to provide treasury with a more insights and global solution, which could lead to multiple robust KYC solution. This is my insight. The fact is, tomorrow, if I choose one solution, and will this solution be acceptable by my multiple bank partner or my bank partners? So we wanted to open the discussion with bank to see where they stand, where they go, what are they planning regarding this, regarding to KYC, keep their own platform, adopt one or single solution, we don't know. And this is, I think, a good insight to be provided to corporates in the coming months. And we envision to start this discussion in September or earlier.
Thank you so much for sharing. Now, we're running close to the end of the session. We promised the audience we would take some questions. Some have come up. And I've just communicated with Tarek that we will take up the question on the data protection. So if I may hand over to you, Tarek.
You know, I think there's a question on the interaction between the general data protection regulation and KYC requirements, because obviously there's a lot of personal information involved, and GDPR restricts the extent to which you can actually process and share personal and private information. And ultimately, this has been one of the straitjackets that has been identified for a number of years in the GDPR framework, that there needs to be a public interest exemption for sharing of private data. This is also relevant for sharing of information between AML authorities, for example. So this is meant to be looked at in the context of the review of the AML rules that is coming up. The European Commission will propose that legislation in July. And more broadly, they're looking at these particular aspects for a possible review of the GDPR regulation, to what extent there could be more exemptions inserted for these public interest functions, for example, like when you need to share private information to comply with higher regulatory requirements, for example. So just wanted to pick up on that.
Thank you very much, Tarek. Now we're coming to the end of this online session. As you notice, there is a lot to talk about. I think we could have exchanged for an hour more. I do apologize for us not being able to pick up on all the questions. However, we promise to come back to you on those questions. And also, you've heard there are a lot of topics still to be addressed. You have heard that some of the national treasury associations are working on these topics, so that there is ongoing work also in your regional countries. So please join the associations in this work, share your opinions. I would also like to mention that in the EACT, the Luxembourg Association is very active on the KYC topics. So you can be sure that you will be hearing more on these topics. You heard from Noel that the French Association is working on it, also the Belgian Association, like Patrick told us. So you will be hearing more under this headline, EACT in Action, for corporate treasurers to share. Thank you very much to the panelists for your contributions, for the time you took and sharing your insights. And with this, and also thank you to the audience for taking the time. If you like, there will be a recording available in the next days on the EACT website. And also there we will respond to the questions.